Hello everyone, it's been about a week since I've done another video, but I figured it's time to do another video for you guys. I've been busy the last week, so haven't really had time to do a video during my breaks, but I've been preparing for my project by buying new books recently, and that kind of has led me to want to talk with you guys today about the first step towards my Bible project, and that is I want to make a Hebrew dictionary, and the goal of the Hebrew dictionary will be to basically, as I'm in the process of learning the Hebrew language, I'll be making this dictionary, and that way I will be able to translate it most accurately. Because one thing that's interesting of many Bible translations of in English, for example, like the NIV and all kinds of modern translations, the experts will often admit that they don't understand what the meaning of the Hebrew is. They don't understand what the passage means. So it's evident, according to the scholars, that a lot more study is needed of the Hebrew language to really understand it better and properly translate portions of the Bible. So that is my goal to, as an initial step towards my Bible project, I will be going through the Hebrew language, going through the different vocabulary words, and making my own dictionary. I also plan on making videos as I'm going through this process. I'm going to make some videos occasionally and share with you guys meanings of certain Hebrew words, and I believe it will be very eye-opening for people, because a lot of understanding about the Hebrew is lost due to the English translation. Hebrew words have a much deeper meaning in the original language. It has a far greater depth, and of course the translations put in their own bias often. So I not only want to make a translation for people, but I also want to help people understand the Hebrew language as well. Especially because, for example, who knows if I'll always be around to do the Bible project. Maybe something could happen to me, and it would be nice for someone else to take up the mantle if for some tragedy something were to happen. So the more people that learn the ancient ways, the more likely we can restore the truths to people. So the big thing about learning Hebrew is it has related languages like Arabic, Aramaic, and there are some other ones too, like the Ethiopian language, where scholars talk about a original language of the Semitic languages. They call it Proto Semitic, and the basic idea is that the original Proto Semitic is the source of all the other Semitic languages that we're aware of. So, for example, a lot of people believe Hebrew is the original language that was spoken by Moses, by Abraham, by Adam. Now, in some sense, we believe this is true. I believe this is true because of, for example, the Book of Jubilees actually says Hebrew was the original language. But the thing is, for example, when you call, like, let's take English, for example. You take the language of English and you say English is a language. But that means something very different over time. Like 1,000 years ago, English isn't even recognizable to people who speak English today. It's that different. It's called Old English, and the forms are very different. Their grammar rules have some more archaic forms, etc. different vocabulary, for example, where now in the more modern English, it's practically like a different language entirely, because that's how much it's changed. And yeah, and so for Hebrew, there's modern Hebrew, and that's definitely not the original language, because it has a lot of loan words from other languages like English, and it also has modern grammar that's derived partially from English and other languages. But even if you go to the Bible, Biblical Hebrew, as well as Dead Sea Scrolls Hebrew, what is indicated is that Hebrew is not the original from the beginning of creation, from when Adam spoke, what Noah spoke, what Abraham and even Moses. But it is probably the Biblical Hebrew or Qumran Hebrew, some variant form of that, is probably the main language of most of the Bible, because most of the Bible was actually written well after the time of Moses. The Bible, like for example, the 5 books of Moses, I used to believe that those were written by Moses himself, but I have come through my understanding and study to realize that those books were not written by Moses in their entirety, but rather whoever compiled the 5 books of Moses, they took earlier writings of Moses. So they took Moses' other writings and they say, okay, here's Moses' writings. Let's make a book to compile the story of Moses into a more compact form that people can understand better. That was their idea. So they took the writings of Moses and made the 5 books of Moses. Similarly, with other books of the Bible, you have the Psalms. David did over 4,000 Psalms according to the Dead Sea Scrolls. But only a small portion of those Psalms have been preserved in our Bibles. And the reason for that is that the later generations made different copies of it. And they did not, because 4,000 Psalms, that's a lot to copy in a single volume, especially the ancients when they were writing it by hand. So they decided to write it in cyclical books, where there were one book for these Psalms and there's another book for these Psalms, so that people could say to themselves, okay, I want to read these type of Psalms of David. So they would go to those Psalms of David for that book. And then a different book was the other Psalms of David. And they had all a bunch of different books so that it would be easier to preserve his Psalms. And so what we have, the book of Psalms, is not what David wrote, but it contains the vast majority of what's in the book of Psalms are David's Psalms, but in a corrupted form over time, because the scribes have changed things, as I've mentioned before. But we also have other books of the Bible, such as the book of Joshua, for example. That was not written by Joshua. There were writings by Joshua. According to the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have another writing of Joshua in fragments. So we know there was a writing of Joshua, but the book of Joshua we have was not written by Joshua. Book of Judges, it was written after the time of the Judges. Probably there were earlier books from the time of the Judges, recording the events in particular periods of the Judges. And then someone took all those many books and decided to make a shorter story, like a history book version, where it gives the main narrative, but it doesn't give all the mega details that were in these earlier books that are now lost. We see the same thing happen with a bunch of the other books, the books of the Kings and Chronicles. Those are derived from other books. They're condensed material. The prophets, for example, the minor prophets they call it. It's clear, the evidence is clear to me that those prophecies are extracts from earlier books of the prophets that we no longer have. And someone decided to make a thematic book that was like an extract of the best prophecies or thematic prophecies from the 12 prophets, and they put it together to form a theme. Because if you look at the 12 prophets, they all have similar thematic elements, but the evidence indicates that they did many other prophecies. Like Jonah did other prophecies, and Obadiah must have done other prophecies. It can't be that his only prophecy was regarding Edom in one small little chapter. We have to believe that there were many other prophecies that these prophets spoke, but all we have left is just extracts. So, anyways, the Bible as we have it, and even I would say from the time of David on, the Hebrew that David knew was most likely similar to the Hebrew we know from the biblical Hebrew. It's when you go before David, when you go to the time of Moses, that's when I believe the Hebrew was very different. And any time before that, so Enoch, Book of Abraham, I think the Hebrew of those prior ages was radically different. So over time, the Hebrew language has corrupted itself, just like the English language and other languages. And we can know this by comparing the Hebrew language with its other relatives, what they call sister languages. Aramaic is one of the big ones, as we know. From the Bible, there's passages in Aramaic. Let's see here. Okay. And Arabic. Interestingly, Arabic actually goes back very far into the past. Arabic as we know it dates really only to around the 6th, 7th century AD, but it actually goes way back earlier, and we don't have the writings in Arabic prior to the Quran, because prior to the Quran it was mostly pagan writings, and so people didn't preserve those pagan writings in that older Arabic language. And so Arabic actually goes way back to 1000 BC even. And the Ethiopian language, actually, the origination of the Ethiopian language also goes back way before the earliest manuscripts of Ethiopic that we have. Ethiopian, I think the earliest we have is like 500 AD or something. It's really late of what we have in written form. But the language itself goes even way back to the time of David. So then we have something even further called there are other documents such as Phoenician, which is very similar to Hebrew. You could even call Phoenician just a dialect of Hebrew. That's how close it is. Ugaritic is another language that I've mentioned, and that is very important because Ugaritic is extremely close to Hebrew, but it has some differences. It has some more archaic forms in some ways, but it actually helps us track the evolution of the Hebrew language, because Ugaritic goes back so far, like around to 1200 BC about. Its forms are a very key tool to understanding the Hebrew language, because that's how close it is. Like it has vocabulary words. Okay, so for example, the Hebrew language, there were thousands and thousands and thousands of writings in the Hebrew language that were written by the Israelites and other people and the Canaanites. But as we know, most of those books were lost. That's because of the exile, the Babylonian exile and the Roman exile. That obliterated most of the documents in Hebrew. So we only have a small portion of the actual Hebrew language, and because of that, most of the Hebrew was preserved in only the biblical text. And since the Bible is it's not going to have many words. Like, the English language, we have millions of words, right? So that's how it is for every language. Every language has many, many words, but a lot of those words are rare and not used in certain types of documents. So because the Bible is so limited in scope of theme and and the topics that it's talking about, many words were lost. Many Hebrew words have been lost from the Hebrew language because if you don't preserve the documents that have the words, and if people stop speaking the language and forget the words, then it's lost and we don't have the words anymore. So that is actually what happened to the Hebrew language. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, some more Hebrew words were discovered. We also have some Hebrew words preserved in rabbinic writings, Hebrew rabbinic and Talmudic type of rabbinic type of writings. They have some Hebrew words as well. But when Ugaritic was found, we were able to utilize Ugaritic to learn more Hebrew words, because that's how close Ugaritic is. So we could take that ancient language and learn more about Hebrew. And that's what a lot of scholars are doing. So it's very important that we study some of these ancient languages related to Hebrew. If you go even farther back, there's a language which is extremely significant called Akkadian. And there's two main dialects of it. One is called Assyrian, and another is called Babylonian. And you're familiar with Babylonian, of course, because many people believe that, and it is true, there's evidence for this, that the Jews were influenced by Babylonian ideas during the Babylonian exile. So those languages are very important for understanding the background of the Bible, and also understanding the Hebrew language better, because they too have words that were once in Hebrew which are no longer there. And it actually, sometimes the words, it's called cognates, where the same word exists in multiple languages, but they're spelled differently, and they come from a different line of transmission. So some of the cognates in Akkadian have the same Hebrew word, but it has a very different meaning in Akkadian. One example that I just recently came upon is the word amar, which in Hebrew means to say, and in Akkadian it means to see. So in one language it's say, in the other see. So we think, well, how did that change happen? How did the meaning of that word change? And my idea, from the little bit I've thought about it, is that, so perhaps the word for say means something along the lines of convey. Because what's interesting is the Ethiopian language also has a slightly different meaning to that same word, amar, and it means to show something. So convey, if you're conveying something, you're showing it, right? But also conveying, by communicating, you're conveying something through words. And the Akkadian means see. That could perhaps mean something along the lines of something being conveyed to you, like your vision is, you're seeing things, and what you're seeing is being conveyed to you. So there are ways to connect these different languages through the same word. So the question is, but how can we be sure about the direction of change? Well, so what I'm suggesting is that both words have a valid meaning, but that the original meaning is the root of both, so that like original Hebrew would have both meanings. It would have the meaning to speak or to say something, but it also would have the meaning of seeing something. It would have the meaning of showing something. Like when you go back, it's likely when you go back that all these languages line up and their meanings come from the original source. So rather than Hebrew as we know it, biblical Hebrew, being the source of like Akkadian, Aramaic, Arabic, it's actually what we could call Proto Hebrew, like, so the original Hebrew that is no longer preserved. That's the source of Akkadian. That's the source of Hebrew. That's the source of Aramaic. That's the source of Arabic. It all goes back to that. So my goal is to make a special dictionary in preparation for my Bible project, so that you guys can also be benefited by the deeper meaning of the Hebrew words. And I am going to document my progress in this, where when I finish a letter of the alphabet, so I'm going to go through each letter of the Hebrew alphabet, starting with Aleph. When I finish Aleph, I will start making videos on Aleph words and tell you about the different Aleph words and their deeper meanings. And you guys will be blown away by the very powerful meaning of this Hebrew stuff, because it just gives a much deeper, it brings the scriptures alive, because when you translate it into the English normal way of translating, it's very stilted and it's very limited in meaning and scope. But when you look at the original meaning of these words in the Hebrew and the different related languages, it really comes alive, and you start to live, breathe, and think the way of the Hebrews. If you want to understand the Bible properly, you have to go into that mindset of how the Hebrews thought. So that's what I'm going to be working on. It'll take a while, but it's very important as a baseline for my Bible project. And I'm not going to keep you guys out of the loop as I'm working on it. I will, when I finish, as I said, when I finish a letter, I'm going to start making videos about the different letters. And I also, in the 2020, so probably starting in January, I will be making, I will be doing videos on the weekends, probably on Shabbat, on Saturday night. So after Shabbat, actually. But I will probably be doing weekly videos, and the idea, I think, initially will be, I will just speak on, I won't have a particular plan necessarily. Some weeks I will, but some weeks I won't, and I'll just ask you guys what you want to talk about. And then, like, for those who are live, and also I could do it earlier in the day too, like afternoon, like during actual Shabbat, like if people prefer that. So I can try to get a feel for what people their preferences for time, especially because people live in all different time zones who are subscribed to my channel. So I want to do something that works for everybody, but I guess we'll play it by ear. So at least for the first one in January. Okay, so you're in Germany, so yeah, so I don't know if that would work for you, but I'll start it sometime on starting in January. I gotta get going back to work, but I can't wait to go on this journey with you guys and share with you the Hebrew language and to really dive into the scriptures together, because I think this journey will be very illuminating, and it will really help people find the truth. And thank you, Natalia, for your compliment. Alright, talk to you guys later. Shalom, have a wonderful day, and I might be back tomorrow during my lunch break to do another video. We'll see. Alright, shalom guys. Bye.